Welcome. Hey, everybody. Okay, awesome. Okay, so while I'm waiting for you guys to type some questions in, I'm going to go ahead and read this one that came via email. This woman says, I'm married to a narcissist. We are separated and he's seeing a counselor. I don't see any changes in the last 2 months he's been going at all. I don't think it's possible to change, but I keep thinking maybe it's possible, or should I just divorce him? We have a 2-year-old and I just want to keep fighting, but I feel like I've already given up. I'm just really depressed and not sure what to do. So, this is the very typical struggle that people get into, hoping that the person is going to change. And the reality is that people change when they want to, like when they want to, and there's nothing you can do to get that person to change. Like, you have no control over it. And the danger for the codependent is to approach that thinking, well, if I love the person more, if I do more for the person, if I open myself more, if I take all the blame and responsibility, and we just keep getting in deeper and deeper through these sorts of rationalizations, like, what should I be doing more? And the reality is, like, when you bring it up with that person, you're like, look, this behavior is a pattern and this behavior is not healthy. This behavior is toxic. This behavior hurts me, and I would like you to look at this and change this. And, maybe the person says, it's not a problem, I don't have a problem, it's you, you're the problem, like, you're hypersensitive, or, you're whatever you are. Or maybe the person tells you what you want to hear. Maybe they tell you, well, okay, I'm going to go to counseling, like this woman's husband, going to go to counseling, I'm going to get help, I'm going to make a change. But then you see the person is not changing anything. Like, nothing is changing. And if they're not changing right here and now in this moment, if they're not stopping to use those covert aggressive manipulation tactics, they're still using those manipulation tactics, that person doesn't want to change. That person is not changing, right? So how do you measure that? Someone asked me that also this week, like, what's like, how can I measure this? Like, how can I gauge, change or no change? Like, look at the actions in real time. Like, right here and now, what is the person doing? Are they changing their ways? Or are they continuing to do the same old things, maybe with new rationalizations or new justifications or new excuses why they're doing it? Or maybe they're switching out those techniques for different manipulation tactics because you're already on those, so now they choose different ones. Now maybe they're using more of the guilt tripping and the blame shifting or something like that. When you just see this pattern repeating, that person is not changing. That's the point where it's usually healthier for you to recognize that person is not changing and that you need to move forward with your life so that you don't keep going down that hole. And that's where I use that phrase, burying the hope. Because that hope, keeping that hope alive, the hope that that person's going to change, the hope that you're going to have the marriage you always wanted with that person, the hope that you're going to create this future together that you had talked about, or that the person is always promising you, that hope is not real. And that hope can really become toxic for you when you're holding on to the hope for something that's never going to happen, and, can't say never, never on anything, right? But the reality is, like, look at the situation right now. Look at the reality right now, here and now. Is the person changing? Is the person taking action, different action to not do those same behaviors? If they're not taking those actions, it's time to bury that hope. It's time to move forward. Otherwise, you're just going to stay in that downward spiral. I think this woman, she used the word, oops, I lost it. Oh, darn. She used the word depressed. She was feeling so depressed, waiting for this person to change. And, now he's going to, oh no, now I lost the page. No. Okay. Waiting for him to go to counseling, but not seeing any change. After 2 months, if there's no change after counseling, that person's not changing. They're just not changing. So, you really need to get honest with yourself, really take a look at that situation and decide, like, is it worth it for you anymore? Are you ready to bury that hope? Are you ready to take care of yourself and be there first for yourself, so that you can live the life that you want to live, so that you can be happy, so that you can provide. This woman has a 2-year-old daughter, she said, so you can provide the kind of environment and support that you want to provide for your child. So many people say they stayed together in a very unhealthy and unhappy marriage for the kids. But the reality is that it's usually, I think, worse for the kids to stay together and be unhappy, because what's the message that you're teaching the kids? The message you're teaching the kids is, if you're unhappy, you just got to suck it up. You just got to put your head down and just deal with it, and don't make any changes, because you committed to this, and, this is what you got to do. And then the kid watches, the tension between the parents and the arguing between the parents, just the general unhappiness. And that becomes the template for love and relationships for that child, and it's probably a lot healthier for that child, for the two parents to go their separate ways, and each parent has the opportunity to find their own happiness in life and to find themselves and to be, fully present as a parent, for that child, versus sacrificing their happiness and providing a very negative environment for the child. So, I'm sorry, to that woman who wrote that, but I think it's probably time for you to just get really honest with yourself and decide, how much longer are you going to stick around? Are you ready to bury that hope? Are you ready to choose your happiness, and provide for the happiness of your child as well? I've got a couple private messages here. One says, sent you the name of a good movie I saw called Fatal Honeymoon, based on a true story. Okay, I haven't seen it. I'm guessing the theme has something to do with a narcissist or psychopath or something. I'm not familiar with this movie. Someone else says, the healing of a narcissistic person, is it possible? Dr. George Simon, when I interviewed him, he also talked about the spectrum, how autism is on a spectrum, right? There's very severe autism, and then there's more mild autism. And the more mild autism is much more responsive to treatments and whatnot. Very severe, sometimes it's very difficult, to make changes. Autism is not the same as narcissistic personality disorder, but the fact that they both run on a spectrum, right? So, and then in Ross Rosenberg's book, the Human Magnet Syndrome, he talks about, this continuum of self, and he talks about like -1, -2, all the way to -5 being the severe codependent. And then on the narcissistic side, +1, +2, +3, all the way to +5, and +5 being like the very severe narcissist. So, when you're dealing with a person with a few narcissistic tendencies, maybe they just have a few traits. They're not actually, a narcissist, like the number 5, +5 on that scale is a narcissist. +5 on that scale is probably never, ever, ever going to change. Maybe if there is some massive divine intervention, car accident, severe illness, death of someone, that person has their own near-death experience. Like maybe in the case of some kind of, transpersonal experience where suddenly they had this like come to Jesus moment, and they woke up and they saw themselves, maybe, but the odds of that happening are pretty slim. If a person just has a few of the tendencies of narcissism, that's much more workable. That person you could probably talk to, they could probably have more self-awareness. They could possibly start to claim more self-responsibility. They could possibly start to empathize more with the other person and how their actions and behaviors are affecting the other people. People with just a few narcissistic traits, they're probably just a little bit annoying or frustrating to deal with, and maybe they're more responsive to communication. But when you're talking about someone who's, high up on the scale, chances are very, very, very slim that person is going to change. Why? I asked Dr. Simon too, like, why did they do it? Because they can, because they get away with it. So how many years has that person been doing that? Are they in their early 20s? Are they in their early 30s? Okay, maybe there's still more room to shape the character. Are they in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s? By that point, a person is usually really set in their mental ways. And it usually takes a dramatic life event to change them from that mental perspective, and if a person is used to getting what they want, when they want, and just, they're always, they know what they want and that's what they want. And there's nothing going to stop them, for them to suddenly decide that other people's feelings matter and other people are human beings, not objects and not means to their ends. And, for them to totally reconceptualize how they view the world and how they interact with the world, that's going to take a lot for that person to want to change, So really, it's just when you recognize that the person is severe on that narcissistic spectrum, that's pretty much when you got to recognize that that person's not going to change. If they just have a few traits, that's workable, and then you'll see when you dialogue with that person, how open are they to hear you? How open are they to empathize with you or someone else? How open are they to see themselves, to take responsibility, to get help, to work on themselves, to change themselves? If that's not happening, person's just not going to change, and then it's just better for you to walk away, because the only other option down that road, that's the path of insanity. It's crazy making. It'll make you feel like you're losing your mind. You're going to lose your sense of self. Your self-worth is going to go down. Your self-esteem is going to go down. You're going to feel really confused. You're not going to have the energy that you need to do what you want to do in life, and to be who you are, to show up in each moment with everything you've got, because if you all think back to like the point when it was really bad, when you were with this narcissist, whether it was a romantic relationship or a work situation or living situation or however that worked down, and you think back to that, when you think about your mental state, your clarity, when you think about your energy, when you think about, your ability to get things done, how were you doing back then? Probably not so good, right? Like if you look back now, you might only be several weeks or several months, maybe even more than that, into the healing, recovery process. If you look back and recognize where you were back then, that's a reality check. That tells you, wow, when you look back and recognize, like, you didn't even almost recognize yourself. Like that looked like a different person, like who that was in that relationship, whole different situation, whole different reality. And who you are now, getting out of that, recovering from that, getting better. Now you see, in retrospect, how much that really did affect you, and do you want to choose that life? Hopefully not. Hopefully you want to choose the life that leads to happiness and health and sanity and well-being and purpose and fulfillment in life. I know it's really hard because most of us with the codependency patterns, most of us who have been targets and victims of these sorts of cluster B personality disorders, we tend to be very optimistic. We tend to be very hopeful, and it's like to accept that this person isn't going to change, to accept that you have to let go of that person and that relationship to move forward in your life. That's really hard. It almost feels like admitting that you're a failure, or that you failed at that relationship, or you failed at helping that person. That's the really tricky one, right? For the codependent, those of us who have like the fixer, the healer, the caretaker, sort of archetype, is like when we stop trying to help that person change, it's almost like some of us feel like we failed, like we couldn't do it, like we're not good enough because we couldn't help that person change. But that's not the reality. The reality is you have no control over that person. The only thing you have control over is yourself, and that's where you got to be. That's where you got to show up, is show up for yourself, and don't let that weigh on you, because sometimes it's important to let go of that hope, to bury that hope, to have optimism for your future versus optimism for a lost cause, for something that's just a downward spiral, inevitable harm, path to insanity, right? It's better, to redirect your optimism to purpose, to passion, to the future, to right here and now, you taking care of yourself and moving forward. Let's see. Okay, someone says privately, Mare, but what do you think? There is a relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. The executioner is the victim, or the victim is the perpetrator. The executioner is the victim. The executioner is the victim. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking about. So, okay, if you're talking about the drama triangle, is that what you're asking about? Have any of you guys heard of this, the drama triangle? This is fascinating. I think that's what you're talking about, where they have like the victim, the abuser, maybe they call it the perpetrator, and then what's the other one? I forget. There's 3 people on this drama triangle. Have you guys heard of this? You can look on YouTube. There's a bunch of good videos, some with illustrations, some are people talking, and they talk about this drama triangle and how to get out of there, like how to interrupt the pattern, how to stop playing the role. So like if you, the rescuer, right? There's the rescuer is the other one. So thank you. Also, to someone else who put that in there, rescuer, victim, persecutor. Okay. So, if you tend to play the role of the rescuer, right? Maybe you recognize you feel good when you help other people, right? So you tend to attract maybe victims, or people claiming to be a victim, right? Could be a covert narcissist in disguise, could be a borderline personality in disguise as the victim, right? But say this person, it comes up to you and they're like, oh, this isn't working out and I can't do this and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay. And you start offering solutions and the person's like, no. And you're like, okay, well, how about this? And the person's, yeah, but that. Well, how about this? Yeah, but that. And they just keep saying no. And then you're like exhausting yourself, right? And so the way to interrupt that pattern of like you getting caught in the rescuer and the victim thing, is to step out of that and say, okay, so what do you think you'll do about it? Right? So that's empowering to the victim. That helps the victim shift out of the victimhood if they choose to, right? And the victim can say, oh, okay, well, I do have power here. I can do something. That's empowering. Okay, what am I going to do? Or do I really just want to sit around and suck everybody else's energy, trying to get them to solve my problem, which I don't really want to solve because I'd rather just, call the victim and just get attention, and energy and supply in this way of getting other people to help me, but I'm never actually going to take the advice, right? That sort of thing. So yeah, there is a relationship. I would look up the drama triangle to the person who asked this question. Look up the drama triangle and look at how to break those patterns so that you don't keep getting caught in there. Because what can happen too is maybe you always play the rescuer and then the other person plays the victim, but then maybe they flip it on you. And so maybe like the victim is like, you never have any good ideas and you never solve my problem and blah, blah, blah. So now they're the perpetrator and you're the victim, and then you're like, but, and now you're defending yourself. So you're just caught in the triangle, right? So you want to get out of there by interrupting the pattern, by taking a different role, and by empowering that person to do something for themselves versus you solving the problem or you playing whatever role that is. So check out the drama triangle. Oh, good. Someone else added in here, Kapman's drama triangle. That's the person who created it. Kapman, Kapman. I think someone else, it sounds like you know a lot about that. Someone else, I think, created like the new evolution of that, or like then I had seen a video about this last week. There's Kapman's drama triangle, and then some other teacher created like another design. Do you know anything about that or what the person's name is? If you do, can you add that in there? Oh, okay. So someone says the victim stance is poor me. The victim feels victimized, oppressed, helpless, hopeless, powerless, ashamed, right? So the victim, if not being persecuted, will seek out a persecutor and also rescuer who will save the day, but also perpetuate the victim's negative feelings. Right. Okay. So she copied like this whole big thing in here. Check that out. If you want to read about that, about the different roles in the drama triangle. Oh, she sent that privately. Do you want to send that to the group so people can read that? Okay, someone else says here, my adult daughter, 34 years old, is delusional about her narcissistic, now late father. Her father and I divorced about 20 years ago, and he passed on 8 months ago. I supported both my daughters during their dad's illness. After their father's death, my 34-year-old daughter appears to have adopted their father's narcissistic abuse toward me. Thinking back on her relationship with me over the years, I have come to realize that she too has narcissistic traits. I do not have the emotional energy capacity to deal with her. I have been on no contact basis with her for weeks now. Hard to accept the reality that your daughter may be a narcissist. Had a put down message from her this past week again. I opted to refrain from responding. Hard call though. Yeah, that must be really hard. And I can only imagine, because I'm not a parent, having followed your story a bit over the last several months since we've been in contact, that was what it was sounding like was happening, that your oldest daughter was starting to play that narcissistic role. And, I think that you were very patient in waiting it out, and seeing what was going to develop and how things were going to go. And it sounds like you're getting pretty clear about the reality of that, and also clear in your acceptance that it's just easier to step back and to opt out of that, even though she is your daughter. And again, I can't imagine what that struggle is like for you, as a mother, in a way, to be giving up hope on your daughter, that your daughter is just going down that path. But you got to take care of yourself, right? And that's what you're realizing. You're finding out that, going no contact with her is just a lot easier. It keeps you safe. It keeps you healthy. It keeps you well, because getting involved in that, like you already, imagining getting involved in that. And it's like, you feel like you don't have the energy to deal with that, because where that leads to, that just drains your energy dry, and being that she is your daughter, she can probably hit those points a lot better than a lot of other people, because you've known her whole life. And yeah, when you get these put down messages from them, it's really hard not to respond, right? Because you want to stand up for yourself. You want to vindicate yourself, you want to set things right. But, sometimes it just gets down to that question, like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And when you're dealing with a narcissist, you're just not going to be right. Like, no matter what they're telling you, no matter how untrue it is, no matter how provable with the fact it is, if they don't want to believe it and they're going to insist that they're right and you're wrong, like, you don't win that battle. And the only way to win is to step off the field, to be there for yourself, to not get involved in that, and just to be able to be happy, right? Because if you're involved in trying, to deal with that, it's not going to be happy. It's not going to be a happy situation. And I'm really sorry that you're going through that with your daughter. And, hopefully your other daughter will be able to come through, and see things clearly and not get stuck under the wing of your oldest daughter for too long. Hopefully, she figures it out and reaches out to you a lot more. And eventually, usually they do, like, unless she just finds it too comfortable to stay in that situation with her sister, because her sister's reminding her of her dad and all that. But hopefully at some point, it breaks through her awareness and she recognizes what's going on, and how similar that is to her dad, and, how she just doesn't really want to deal with that either. Maybe she can see, you, and recognize that, like, the choices that you've made, the mature adult choices you've made, not to get involved in that, not to create a drama, not to create a fight, not to create, this big situation where you're just stepping out and you're taking care of yourself and you're respecting yourself and you're setting the bar for your self-worth a lot higher. Hopefully your other daughter will realize that too. Not easy, she says. Courageous, though, to call a spade a spade. This is from someone else talking to that person. Sorry. Courageous, though, to call a spade a spade. She's on her path. I was a narc after being raised by narc parents. I found my way, not easily, into being an empath. It happens, but I have no relationship with my family who remains narcissistic. Good job recognizing that, and catching yourself and getting out of that, before you got in too deep. Good job. That rarely happens. And yeah, sometimes it gets to that point where you recognize, like, you can't have a relationship with your own family, your own flesh and blood, because it's just too dangerous. Either in this person's case, it sounds like, the danger is getting sucked into those patterns and becoming like them to survive like them. For the codependents recovering from these familial dynamics, the danger is just getting sucked into that dynamic where you're the codependent and then the other family member or members are the narcissists, and it just keeps you in that abuse cycle. And sometimes you really just have to go no contact with your own family and create a new family on your own, one that isn't related by blood, but is certainly, a lot closer to you in your values, in the way that you treat one another, in the way that you respect one another, in the way that you love one another and mutually uplift each other versus putting each other down. The original person said there, my daughter plays the victim role, accuses me of not being supportive of her during her period of grief. Yeah, so it's good that you identify, what role she's using. So, you can see how they're using that. Those are the tricky narcissists, the ones who play the victim, the covert narcissists usually, or the borderlines, they'll often play that victim role. And so it's really tricky, but it sounds like you figured it out. You listened to your intuition, not to give into that. And you're giving her space and time to deal with her grief. It's not like you're interrupting that, if she's not getting what she wants from you, she's going to say whatever she needs to say, whatever she wants to say to try to get some guilt. It sounds like guilt tripping might be one of her favorite, manipulation tactics, which guilt tripping is often the favorite manipulation tactic of the victim type of narc. Okay, good. So that person copied the information there. For those of you who want to know about, the drama triangle, the victim and the rescuer, she typed that there in the chat. You can check that out from Kapman's drama triangle. Oh, you're welcome to the person with the daughter. Yeah, big hug to you. Big hug to you. And like I said, you are really handling this in a very mature adult way, so good job. You have all along. Someone else said to her, if she feels not supported and there is validity to it, that's one thing to look at. But if your sense is that she's being manipulative, that's not cool. Yeah. And that's the case with, the one who plays the victim, is it triggers your conscience to go, are you sure? Are you not doing enough? Do you need to do more for that person? Do you need to love them more? Do you need to do more? And that's that dangerous place that you get into, as a codependent, thinking that it's your fault, taking on the responsibility, and her grieving is her own responsibility. It's not your fault that he died. And it's not your fault that, he was who he was when he died. And it's not your fault what happened between your daughter and her father. And if she wants to work that out in a healthy and mature adult way, she knows how to find you, but if instead she just wants to blame you and use guilt tripping, you don't have to entertain that. You don't have to, give any energy to that, because that's a very toxic pattern. Someone else is here. Do you think that at the beginning of the relationship, the narc actually liked me? Or do you think he knowingly set out to destroy me? I was long-term supply, meaning I became his wife. So, okay, so you recognize the long-term supply. Sounds like you read Psychopath Free by Jackson Mackenzie. He makes the differentiation between like the temporary supply and the long-term supply. The long-term supply being the target or victim that, the narc cultivates to be there for the long run. They hope that you will forever and always enable their abuse, and that you'll always be this like perfect, husband and wife, image to the world, and no one will ever suspect anything is going on, because you'll just rationalize and accept the excuses and maybe even defend and excuse this person to other people. And so, typically they invest a lot more time in the idealization of that long-term supply. So when a person is cultivating like the long run, usually there's a lot more premeditation there. Like the sociopath who decides that he needs a cover, like he can't just be a single person. It could be a she, but, let's just use a man, for example. Like the sociopath decides that he needs to have a wife and a kid, and at least a kid or a family, to create a cover, that he's a normal person, that, everything's just normal here and he's not he's not anything suspicious. So he'll find out, and he'll groom, and he'll cultivate, that perfect spouse, and then set up the family, and, try to pretend like everything is just normal, to the outside world, while, abusing the family and or doing whatever he's doing, with a corporation or a government, or however, he's affecting society on the whole with his manipulation and exploitation. So, with the long-term supply, yeah, probably he put a lot more time into, what he was going to get out of you. Maybe he didn't use the word destroy. Maybe that's not how he saw it. Maybe he just saw it like you had something he wanted. Maybe it was just, the cover of having you as a wife, and giving the image of having this perfect life to the outside world. Maybe you had something specific that he wanted from you. Maybe you had financial resources, or a house, or a car, or, maybe you really, wanted to have children, and he saw like this perfect wife material who wanted to fully, devote her life to the kids. And, he just figured that would be a good investment. Or maybe he recognized your codependency patterns. Maybe he recognized that you're always going to self-doubt and second guess yourself, and believe him instead, and, make rationalizations and excuses for his behavior, and even defend him to other people, these sorts of things. So probably, the answer to your question, yeah, probably he saw something that he wanted to manipulate and exploit, and he planned it. Probably he didn't use the word destroy. That's probably something that, they feel when you have something that they will never have, or you have something that they want and you won't give it to them, that sort of thing. That's when they usually try to destroy you. But probably he just thought he would just suck you dry and just suck that out of you, and use you as a form of supply. So yeah, usually they are looking at you like an object. They call it objectification, right? Where they look at people as a means to their ends. What is it, a narcissist want? They want what they want, whatever that end goal is. And whoever they use in the way to get there, they don't care. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care about your needs. They don't care about your desires. They just want what they want, and they're going to use you to get there. And they don't care how you feel about it in the process. Oh, you describe it very well. That makes so much sense. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm really glad you recognize it, though. I think for the long-term supply, sometimes they have a harder time. Sometimes I hear from people who have been in marriages for a decade or 2 decades, like 20 freaking years with this person. And they're just realizing it, but then they get out, and that's like a miracle, that you recognized it and that you got out, because it was all set up for you to just be comfortable in there, and to not question it and to not get out. Because if you were cultivated and groomed to be the long-term supply, you were meant to be the long-term supply. Like, you weren't meant to get out of that. You weren't meant to see your way out. So good job. 19 years. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent job. Excellent job. Okay, someone says here, this was fundamental in understanding the dynamic between the codependent and the narcissist. Okay, so somebody put a link here, an article in Psychology Today called The Relationship Triangle. Awesome. Oh, is that part of the drama triangle that we were talking about earlier? I think you were the one who knew all about the drama triangle. Yes, it is. Awesome. Okay, so those of you who are here, if you want to click on that link, Psychology Today, you can check that out. Someone else is here. So I finally said to my sister that I couldn't have a relationship with her any longer, since she is still friends with my ex-best friend forever, who I've gone no contact with for over 2 years now. I recently asked you about how I should proceed with my sister, who is the golden child, and I'm the scapegoat. At first, my sister was angry at me for dumping heavy-hearted conversations on her whenever I felt like it, that I'm the selfish one. I just told her that I can see now she doesn't care about me, and that there cannot be a genuine relationship for us. 2 days later, she emailed me saying that she has unfriended the friend to show me that she cares for me. But then she came home for the weekend, and since I was unable to respond to her email, she was very obviously avoiding me around the house. I saw my therapist and she said that it was good that I was going no contact with my sister because then I'd be breaking the scapegoat dynamic role. Why do you think she has agreed to unfriend my friend now? Well, that's interesting. 2 years. So 2 years ago, you went no contact with your friend. Were you asking your sister all along? Or how long has the dialogue been there for you and your sister? Yes, for the last 2 years. And then now all of a sudden, that's interesting. Maybe it's because you had that conversation with her. You said you just told her that you can see now she doesn't care about you and there cannot be a genuine relationship. You know, maybe it's that, your sister saw the reality of the situation where you're like, okay, I tried to talk to you about this 2 years ago and you didn't get it. So let me just make this super, super clear. I don't feel like you care about me because you're doing this and there can't be a genuine relationship here. Maybe, and then 2 days later she emailed you, maybe your sister saw the light. Maybe she just didn't get it, maybe. But if your sister has the narcissistic tendencies and your gut is telling you, yeah, right? Because on the surface, that's what it can look like. Like I'm on the outside looking at the surface, I can say maybe that's what she was doing. But if you're in it and you're like, this just doesn't feel good, it just feels like another game, it doesn't feel real, then you should listen to that, because it could be, my sis is also turning into a narc like my mom. Yeah. So, if you're getting that gut feeling and stuff, and this doesn't feel right, and, is it just that she's doing, what she thinks that you want just to try to get in with you, but then she's going to keep doing what she's doing, and like, if that's what's happening, then that's not healthy, and only that because you're in there. But the fact that she was avoiding you and like being like passive aggressive and, not talking to you about it. Cause normally, so she was around the house, normally most people I would think would be like, hey, I sent you an email. Did you get it? Can we talk about that since we're here right now? But she didn't, right? It was like she was avoiding you. So she was ashamed about something, probably, and or nervous about your reaction to something. So it's good that you're seeing your therapist and you're talking about this, and the reality, like she said to you too, like doing the no contact with her is breaking that dynamic, because if you stay in that dynamic and you allow her to scapegoat you, either triangulating with that former friend of yours or between you and your mom, or any other situation, if she's doing that kind of stuff, that's not safe for you at all. And, having any contact is going to keep you in that scapegoat role. And so, why is she doing it right now? Possibly as a form of manipulation. Like if you're getting that strong feeling, like, she's already turning into a narcissist, like she's already doing these sneaky, tricky things, and your gut feeling is telling you not to trust that. Like it seems on the surface and to the outsider, it seems like a good thing. Like maybe she saw the light, but if that's not what you're feeling, and then the manipulation, maybe there's like some, covert blaming that she's doing to you, or maybe she's giving you like, I sacrificed this friendship for you, that sort of thing, then that's manipulative. That's not a healthy situation, right? So listen to your gut, listen to your intuition. You know her really well because you're sisters, you grew up together, you've known her your whole life, and really listen to your intuition on this. And, don't break the no contact unless you feel that it's safe to do that. If you feel like you can stay out of that role, and if you feel like you can recognize when she's trying to pull you back into that scapegoat role and you can step out immediately again, then okay, that's good, but don't set yourself up to get caught back in there, unknowingly, because that could be a dangerous situation. Yeah, you're right. I sense it was my mom who influenced her decision. Interesting. Interesting. So yeah, we don't really know what's going on there. If your mom and her, if your mom is a narcissist, which I think you're saying she is, and, your mom is telling your sister, who's also a narcissist, to do something, it's probably for a reason. Like there's probably, you know, some intent there that you're not aware of. There's some reason why they're doing it, you know, why she's encouraging her to do that. So I would be very cautious moving forward. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, trust your intuition. Trust your gut on that. Someone says, I had to break no contact over a health insurance issue. I was upset, and late that evening, I sent him a text which felt very good. I told him that, for the record, I loved you with all my heart and soul and did everything humanly possible to make our marriage work. I told him I feel used, duped, hurt, feel like he misrepresented himself. Told him that I felt like I never had an all-in partner. Told him I was working on forgiveness in the next chapter of my life. I was married to this man for 8 years. He responded to this with 4 emojis, 2 that he used to send me in a loving way, a queen with a crown, a sunshine, a mountain vista, and a cross. What the hell? I still feel good that I sent it and got that out and then went back to no contact. Okay, good. No contact sounds like the way to go. I mean, 8 years with this person, and what can he come up with? 4 emojis, right? Like these images, nothing to do with what you wrote, you know, no addressing of anything, no self-responsibility, you know, none of that. So, okay, you got the health insurance issue resolved, hopefully. Now you can be no contact. It sounds like, you know, you felt like you needed to say those things for your own closure. And now hopefully you can be ready to move forward without reaching out, saying anything more to him, because, you know, that's his response just tells you like, you're not going to get anything more from there. You're not going to get any more closure. You're not going to get any more understanding. You're not going to get an apology. You're not going to get him owing up to anything. You're just going to get these ridiculous emojis, and that's just going to make you more upset, right? So hopefully it's really clear now. Stay no contact. Okay, someone else said, I also broke no contact. They get worse. Yeah. You know, sometimes, and I've made this error so many times. I didn't know about no contact. And so like I would reach out after the fact and try to get closure, either asking for closure or saying I forgave them, or, you know, speaking the truth that I needed to get out that I wished I'd always said. And usually it just made things worse, you know, either because I didn't get the response that I wanted, or they got really upset, or I opened the door then for them to kind of hang around and just sniff around and check in every now and then and see how I was doing and whatnot. And then that just kept setting me back like every time. So, you know, once you get to that point, this last person sounds like you get it now, like you're done with that. So the safest thing for you moving forward is just no contact. Someone says here, you mentioned guilt tripping. One of the narcs I met used this against me. He wanted constant contact with me. He would text every day, and I felt compelled to answer because when I didn't, he would later say that he was very worried, as if I could have died, and that's why I didn't answer. So every time I didn't want to talk, I thought, oh my God, he'll think I'm dead, so I can't let him believe that. I'd be an awful person. He was very careful not to blame me because he knew others used that technique with me. If I didn't answer, they would get mad and blame me. So he would just say, that's just me, I worry, and guilt trip me into talking to him every single time he wanted to know what I was doing. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's that. The narcissistic mothers are like the masters of using that kind of guilt trip. You know, well, you know, telling their 30-some-year-old daughter, you know, when she's home visiting, you know, like just don't stay out too late because, you know, I worry about you and I can't sleep. Poor me. I can't sleep till I know you're home, you know. So don't have a life and don't have any fun and be sure you're back here so that I can sleep because I worry. And it sounds like such a noble thing to worry. But, you know, the thing is that worry is actually very toxic. Like when you worry about someone or when someone worries about you, they're sending this like negative toxic energy your way, and it just like pollutes your energy field. So they're not doing you a favor by worrying about you. They're just like sending negative energy, tension, you know, in your direction. It's not helpful for anybody, you know, but for somebody who likes to use the guilt tripping, they look at that as like a badge, you know, it's like, oh, I can say that I worry, and that makes me powerful and important, and it makes me a good, noble person, you know. So it doesn't look like anything tricky and covert manipulation is happening there, but it is, you know. That's not right. It's not right to do that to someone else. And yeah, so, you know, essentially what that person was telling you was that you had to always check in. You know, they had to know where you were, but instead of telling you, you know, that they wanted to control it in that direction, they played the victim and they played the guilt tripping. Well, I'll just worry if I don't hear from you and know where your whereabouts are every single moment of every single day, you know, that kind of deal. I mean, I've even heard of people who got divorced and found out later that there was like spyware installed on their computer, on their cell phone, that their ex knew like exactly where they were and what they were messaging to people and what they were doing. And then when it all came out and it was like provable, like undeniable, this person had installed spyware, you know, and then the ex says, well, I was worried about you and the kids and blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. You know, so when you hear that kind of excuse, like look a little bit closer. You know, how is this serving that person? How is this worry serving that person? You know, why are they using this skill trip? You know, probably because they're trying to control your behavior, possibly because they're trying to control your joy out there in the world that didn't have something to do with them, you know, that kind of situation. And then if you don't check in and respond, then you're the bad guy and it's all your fault, and they're going to ruin any kind of time that you're having away from them. So, you know, the guilt tripping, it's funny too, like guilt tripping, like so many of us, we just don't even realize like that's a form of manipulation. That's a covert, aggressive form of manipulation. Look in Dr. George Simon's book, In Sheep's Clothing. You'll see it. It's spelled out right there, you know, and that happens to be like the choice manipulation, the favorite one for victims. Like they love the guilt tripping because it looks so noble. And, you know, it makes other people really confused and thinking it's their fault and their responsibility. Because remember, a cluster B will rely on the fact that your conscience works in a healthy way. They will rely on the fact that you are going to doubt yourself. You are going to second guess yourself before you're going to doubt another person, or you're going to distrust another person and what they're saying and doing. And that's very dangerous, right? That's why first and foremost, you got to trust yourself. And I know like it is really hard when you're in that place where you're telling yourself, I either have to choose between believing in myself or believing in the person that I love. That's a really hard decision. And I can tell you that every single time, what is best for you is to believe in yourself. Because if you don't believe in yourself, you are setting yourself up to be a target for manipulation. You're setting yourself up. Like you got to be really honest with yourself, right? And like, I know my audience, I know who I'm talking to. I'm not talking to a narcissist, you know, like they're much more about themselves than anybody else. I'm talking predominantly to codependents, recovering codependents, who always second guess themselves and believe in what somebody else is saying, you know, believe in their rationalizations, believe in their excuses, believe in their intents and in what they're saying and the words they're saying. That's just what we tend to do first, you know. So the healing path on that is to validate yourself and that intuition. Like when you get that feeling about something, you got to listen to it. Listen to that intuition, because otherwise you're sacrificing the self-trust, you know, and it's probably not going to go well. So believe in yourself. That person says, exactly. Even when we were talking, I could never end the conversation spontaneously like I did with everyone else in my life, because otherwise, he said, it makes me feel like I'm not important. It was acceptable for me, and he knew this because it was about him and not me. So every time I'd have to say, sorry, I have to go because I have to do X or Y, anything else was perceived as cold and rude, and he would later be all weird and cold and upset as a punishment. Yeah, so it sounds like he didn't want you to do anything that didn't involve him. And then you got really insecure when you wanted to go do something without him. I could not just let the conversation die like people do one asks, how's it going? What are you doing? And the other says, all good, I'm working, and it ends there and nobody's upset. I had to say, I'm sorry, I really have to do insert detailed description of whatever I had to do. Let's talk later. Yeah. When you're in that point where you feel like you have to justify and over explain everything, like, you know, so many recovering codependents, right? Like at work or in friendships or whatever, you notice somebody says, you know, oh, can you do this? And then instead of the person being like, well, you know, I really can't because my schedule is full right now. It's like the codependent or the recovering codependent will often tell you, oh, I'm so sorry. I really wish that I could help you, but I got this and I got that. And I really would, but I have this and I have that. And it's like, you feel like you have to like so justify your actions, your thoughts, your beliefs, your feelings, your perceptions of reality, because you were used to that being in a relationship with a narcissist, growing up with a narcissistic parent. Oh boy, were you doing that, you know, like all the time, always. What are you doing? Where are you going to go? Like you always had to talk about what you were going to be doing, who you're going to be with. There was always like tabs kept on you, you know, like what you were doing, and always had to know about you. It sounds like that's what was going on, you know, in your relationship. And yeah, it's not healthy, right? When you feel like you have to do that kind of stuff. And then to get punished afterward, right? To get punished for having any kind of life, for doing anything else. Like if you're with a partner or you have a friend even who is not okay with you having a life outside of them, you know, or maybe it's a parent, right? They're not okay with you having friends and wanting to go do things. Your narcissistic partner is not okay with the fact that you have friends and interests and hobbies and things you want to do outside and away from them. You know, your narcissistic friend is going to be jealous if you're going out with another friend and not him or her, and going to go spend time doing something else with someone else, you know, because it's all about them. That's the thing. And so when you're getting into that situation and you're feeling uncomfortable because you feel like you have to justify what you're doing, totally over explain it, you know, to justify what you're doing, and then feel guilty for going and having a life and doing something else, and then deal with the punishment on top of that, that's a very toxic situation. So, you know, take a look at your friendships, take a look at your relationships, take a look at your work situations, at your, you know, even your family dynamics. If those are patterns happening, recognize those are not healthy patterns. Those are toxic patterns. Someone said earlier, yeah, that was my narc father. Worry is control and possession. It's sick. Yeah. But the crazy thing is how worry is disguised as such a noble thing, right? You know, but it's not, right? So once you're on to that, then it's so much clearer. Once you get it, once you're like, okay, so worry is not a noble thing. Worry doesn't get you points, you know, you don't get points for being a worrier. And yeah, that doesn't make you a good person because you worry, because that's often what like the covert narcissist or the borderline who wants to like come off as this really, you know, good and caring and concerned person, you know, they'll justify that their worry and their concern makes them a good person. But look a little bit closer and you'll see, how is that serving them, you know? Another person from earlier says, so there's a bit more. The night before my sis emailed me, my mom was trying to defend my sis and somewhat minimize the relevance of what was going on. Aha! And I just got so infuriated that I screamed at her, which I don't normally do, just to stay out of it. And my mom continued to criticize me, and I said, F you to her. I thought I was going to get kicked out. The next day I get the email from my sis, and my mom acted as if nothing happened and is super nice. What the heck is going on? Is it denial? What the heck is going on is they're in cahoots over this. So your mom, yeah. Okay, so I'm glad that you clarified this. There's definitely more to the story. So the night before you got that email from your sister, your mom came in and tried to manage the situation, defending your sister, right? And, you know, in the fact that she was still staying in contact with that friend of yours who you know, knew was toxic, and you knew that, you know, your sister being in contact with this person was not healthy, you know, for you to keep in contact with your sister, because that former friend was not a healthy person. It was a dangerous person to be around. And your mom is minimizing the relevance of this, which means she doesn't care about your well-being, you know, doesn't care. She's unable and unwilling to recognize the fact that that was unhealthy, that friendship was unhealthy for you, that that person, you know, brought toxic energy into your life. she can't see that because that's what she's doing. She's doing the same thing, and or, you know, she's defending that because she's well aware of what she's doing. And, you know, that's why she's defending someone who's doing something similar to her. It's also why she's defending your sister. So now that that's clear, you know, and the fact that you just got so upset about that tells you what your real feeling is about that. You know, that anger means something's going on there. You're being hurt somehow. So it sounds like your mom and your sister are in cahoots about that. That sounds, you know, like it was all a manipulation, and it does sound like a dangerous situation. So, you know, I would go ahead and keep that no contact with your sister if that's what you're feeling, you know, because it just sounds like that's not a healthy situation. And it sounds like, you know, that's just drama. Like they're creating that drama. I wouldn't doubt if your sister isn't still in contact with that person, just not openly on Facebook or wherever, you know, that social media connection was that you were seeing between them. So yeah, I would definitely proceed with caution, with healthy, strong, safe, clear boundaries with your mom and your sister, you know, and just don't let them, you know, convince you. Cause that's the thing, like, that's where we get caught enabling. That is what enabling is accepting the excuse, buying it, accepting the rationalization, accepting the minimization, accepting the guilt trip, accepting whatever excuse that they're saying that gets you to doubt yourself and believe them instead. You know, that's the enabling, right? So stay out of that game, you know, stay clear in your perspective, and, you know, stay clear with your boundaries to keep yourself safe. And my suspicion is you're going to see more of that, you know, revealing itself over time. It's just recently happening, and that's probably not over. You're probably going to see that more. Sorry that you're going through that with your own mom and sister too. You're so right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so the person with the worrier says, if I didn't have anything really important to tell him, something that was very upsetting to me, he said he felt silenced. He asked me how I was doing, and fine was not acceptable. I'd have to have a big issue to talk about, and I'd have to be willing to ask him for help so he'd feel important. Otherwise, he said, I won't stick around, because he felt silenced. Now that he's not sticking around, it's so much better. The brain fog disappeared like magic. Amen. You know, it's funny how fast the brain fog starts to go away and the clarity comes back, and that confusion starts to fade away after the no contact boundary. You know, that boundary, the no contact, changes everything. Like, one is it changes your energy. Like, suddenly you realize you have so much more energy because you're not leaking it, you know, out to these very toxic people and toxic dynamics. And also their toxicity is not getting in, like their put downs, their criticisms, their doubts, you know, just these circular, exhausting conversations where you had to like talk about all, you know, make up some kind of drama that he can solve for you, you know, or he didn't feel good. He didn't feel like he had a role in there, you know. It's like, essentially he wants this. He wants you to be down here with problems and him to be up here with the answers. And he wants you to listen to his answers and come to him for help so he can feel important about himself, you know, and keeping that dynamic. So it's good that you recognize that. And really glad to hear that you're feeling better and your brain fog is disappearing. Because yeah, that is the thing. And that's why, like, as long as there's any contact, like if a person is like months and months out of this and they're like, man, I still can't get clear. I still can't get out of it. I still want them back. I still am really sad. You know, I'm like, okay, so what's not clear here? Like, what boundary isn't clear? Like, are you not no contact? Or, you know, if the case of the person has a child, you know, with the narcissist, like, are you going gray rock? You know, is the gray rock working, or is there some hole in the boundary there, you know, in the way that you're setting up that communication, because something's getting in. Like, if you're not feeling better, if that brain fog isn't clearing up, if you're not getting the clarity, you know, coming out of that confusion, then something's still not right. Something's still getting in, and it's a boundary problem. It's almost always a boundary problem. The only other thing that could be getting in the way is the hope, you know, that we've talked about earlier, the toxic hope of hoping that person is going to change, or hoping that maybe that future is going to happen, that person promised you. You know, that is the only other area that tends to keep a person stuck there, you know, in that victimization is either they're still in contact somehow, or they're still like, you know, looking on their photos or creeping on their Facebook page or something. That's still in contact, you know, or maybe they're just still trying to like drive by the place where they know they could see that person. Maybe they'll just catch a glimpse of the person, still not no contact, right? So yeah, that person's still going to be in the fog, but you're out of that now. I'm really happy to hear that. And yeah, it is like magic, right? When that brain fog suddenly lifts, but it's not just magic. Like you took the step, you set a boundary that changed everything. Person says, yeah, thank God in the universe, he's not sticking around. Sticking is the right word because he was sticky, as a matter of fact, like glue, gross, creepy. Yeah, I'm glad he didn't stick around either, because you didn't give him the supply. You took the supply away. You recognized the pattern. You recognized something wasn't right there. And thankfully he moved on. That just makes it easier for you, you know, but the best part though is how clear you are, you know, in your resolve about that and your understanding of what that is and how you don't want any part of that. This one I was talking about too. He always had this crazy and absurd stories. I'm sure half of them were completely made up and the other half, at least 50% made up. Yeah. You know, the histrionic, the storytelling of the histrionic, right? So you rarely hear about the histrionics. Like we talk a lot about narcissists and borderlines and sociopaths and psychopaths, but like people don't talk about the histrionics a lot. And sometimes there's just so much comorbidity, right? That you'll notice the histrionic tendencies in most of the cluster Bs, particularly the way they tell their stories. And it's like, you can tell that like, do you know that person, right? Or maybe it was someone in the past who's like, they're always telling you the same friggin' story. And it's like, they tell it the same way every time. It's like they rehearsed it like it's a speech, and they even give it like a speech, you know, and like, they do the same thing every time they tell that story. And it's like, it's this monologue that goes on for so long. There's no room for any conversation or interaction about it. It's just like this monologue that they deliver, but as if they were on stage giving that story, you know, that monologue to like an audience. And then they expect you to go, oh, you know, and like just be totally enthralled in their story. And they don't even realize that they've told you that story like over and over and over again. And like, you could literally just tell them the story because you know the story so well because they've told it so many times. And how exhausting is that? Yeah. Oh, someone else, I missed this one. It says, you've just reminded me that mine used to talk constantly and expect me to listen. It was so exhausting. If I switched off for a moment, he would test me. What did I just say? Oh my God, I don't miss that nonsense. Yeah. Yeah. When they're talking about themselves, you need to be like, you know, totally in there and listening and right. And like just totally paying attention. But when you're talking about you, what's happening? Yeah. Sure. Right. You know what I mean? Like they're not paying attention to you. They don't care about what you're talking about. Or maybe they even stand up and walk away. Or my favorite is when they're like, oh, I'm really still listening to you. And they're walking away and they're doing something else, you know, but when they're talking to you, they're never doing those things. They're never multitasking. It's not like they're just ADD and they're always multitasking. No, because when it's about them, they're fully present. You know, their legs are crossed. Do you ever see that? You know, and like they fully expect you to be like totally engaged with what they're doing. Yeah, it's exhausting. It's utterly exhausting. And it's not fair because they don't have that same attention for you. Oh yes, they want all the attention. They always are either the victim or the hero in the story. And the story is crazy and very unrealistic. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, question. What do you do when your feeling about someone is that they are using you or something is off? It's a new friend and she says she is a nice person, but I felt and feel there is something parasitic or aggressive. She's spoken in ways that are aggressive to me and I'm hypersensitive, so it's not a good gauge of normal. She also said that she normally views all women as catty, and if someone has feedback for her like I did, I said that how she was coming across toward me came across as fake and made me uncomfortable, is to call them a bitch and chew them out. I'm honestly afraid of her. I hate that I'm such a wimp and that I don't trust myself totally, and also hate that I don't know how to extract myself from her. Okay. So good job recognizing that this is probably a toxic situation. Okay. So I know what you mean, like coming from the place of like knowing that you're hypersensitive, right? Which might make you doubt your perceptions. However, if you're hypersensitive, you might be picking up on things that aren't as clear to other people, you know? And so, okay, so here's the deal, right? So you've got this new friend and she says she's a nice person. Like that was my first, like, So if a person has to tell you how nice they are, how amazing they are, what a good whatever they are, and they really go on about that, like they really have to make it a point to tell you how good they are and how amazing they are, one of two things could be happening. One, it could be an unhealthy codependent who all their life has never been heard, has never been acknowledged, has always been put down, and they're just dying for someone to recognize them or to hear them, or, you know, even just to acknowledge the fact that they're a good person. Okay, that could be happening. However, what's possibly happening and what often happens is a narcissistic type of a person loves to tell you how amazing they are and what a nice person they are, and how much they sacrifice for other people and how much they do for other people and this sort of thing. And it's like when someone has to tell you that sort of stuff, it's probably because either they don't believe in it or it's not the case. And they're trying to like convince you to feel that way. So in the case of, you know, the codependent who's really unhealthy and has just never, you know, been heard or acknowledged or recognized, they're probably telling you because they don't really believe that they're that good, but deep down maybe they do, but all their life people have been telling them that they're not good enough. It could be that situation. But if you're getting the suspicion that this is an unhealthy person and you're noticing parasitic aggression, probably this person is telling you that she's a nice person to confuse you, to get you to think that. But, you know, the evidence is proving contrary. So you felt and feel that there is something parasitic and aggressive. When you get that feeling, you want to listen to that. Okay, hypersensitivity and all, you want to tune into that. Like that's your intuition saying something doesn't feel right. You know, if it feels aggressive, it probably is. If it feels parasitic, it probably is. You know, so ask yourself, like, okay, you know, where does this feel like it's crossing a boundary for me? And then get real honest with yourself. You know, how is her behavior crossing a boundary for you? Where doesn't it feel good? Because when you start to get that icky feeling, it's because you let a person cross a boundary. Maybe you didn't even know you had a boundary there yet, right? So maybe that person is just bringing up your attention, you know, bring your attention and awareness to the fact that you need to have a new boundary somewhere to protect yourself from that, so that you don't feel like that, so that whatever happened doesn't happen and allow you to feel like that, you know. And like this test here where, you know, if you said to her, like you felt like she was coming across like she was fake because she's, you know, trying to tell you what a nice person she is, or maybe she's over flattering you and that sort of thing. And you expressed your truth, which is, you know, I feel kind of like you're being fake about this and I feel a little uncomfortable about that. You know, if you're telling that person that and she acts like a bitch and chews you out, yeah, that person is not able to handle that at all. That person sounds like she has narcissistic tendencies, you know, because can't look at herself at all, can't accept any sort of criticism, even constructive criticism. And possibly you hit on the exact thing she was doing. Like when the narcissist goes into a rage, it's often because you called them out. You said, this behavior that you're doing is toxic. I don't like this behavior. You know, or when you do this thing, I feel uncomfortable. When you do that thing, I don't feel good. Like when you call that out and the person gets raged and upset that you're calling it out, possibly a sign that that's a narcissist. You know, it sounds like a lot of red flags here with this friend. And, you know, she also said that she normally views all women as catty. Maybe that's because she's used to hanging out with women like that. You know, if maybe she just had bad experience with women and bullies and gossiping, you know, could be a codependent that's always attracted this narcissistic female who's just catty and gossipy and bitchy, or could be a narcissist who attracts those same characters, much like herself. Or maybe she's projecting and saying, you know, all women are catty so that to try to make you prove yourself You know what I mean? To try to make you doubt yourself, to try to make you never ever bring anything up to her and let her get away with it, right? So, you know, all these sound like red flags. Sounds like you really need to tune into your intuition and ask yourself, okay, you know, what doesn't feel good here? Where does it feel like a boundary is being crossed? And then listen to yourself and listen to your intuition, no matter what she's saying. Because if she's getting enraged, you know, that you're bringing this up, that's probably not a good sign. You know, and so a person might use that rage. A narcissistic person often will use the rage as a form of manipulation, because if they rage loud enough, if they imposition themselves enough on you, that you'll give in. You know, essentially they're bullying you into giving in and giving them what they want, or accepting what they're doing, or doing what they want you to do, you know, that sort of situation. So really get honest with yourself. And, you know, if this isn't a healthy friendship for you, which it doesn't sound like it, you know, even if this person is just an unhealthy codependent and not a narcissist, either way, it's not a healthy person for you. These are not healthy patterns for you. And it's better to not waste your energy on that, to instead practice your boundaries, you know, work the lesson of boundaries and protect yourself. Recognize, you know, where that's not comfortable for you, because maybe now you're recognizing you need to have a boundary where you didn't know you had a limit before, and create space in your life for healthier people to enter, you know. And that's the thing, is like, it's hard to let go of all the toxic friends and the toxic people at first, because you're like, but then I'm going to be all alone, you know. But it's better to get that out of your life, so then the universe can fill that in with something better. Because if your life is full and your energy is depleted and sucked dry because you're always giving it to these characters, then you're not going to have any energy for new people. You're not going to recognize a quality person when they come along, because you're going to be so engulfed in this and second guessing yourself and questioning this and feeling like crap, and, you know, not even having the energy to stand up and go say hello to somebody who you might really hit it off with as a new friendship, because you're so much in this, you know what I mean? So don't be afraid to let go of what's not working, to create space for what could work in the future, and trust yourself. You know, first and foremost, this is a lesson in self-trust for you. You know, and recognizing what's healthy, what's working, and what's not working, and why isn't it working, and where can you put a new boundary to protect yourself and keep yourself healthy and sane. Yeah, that was my sense too. I don't tell people I'm nice if they have negative feedback about me. I slow down and say, whoa, I'm coming across that way? Right. See, you're self-examining, right? If somebody is telling you some kind of negative feedback, you know, you're checking in with yourself. You're like, okay, what am I doing? Like, did I do something, you know, wrong? Did I do something that hurt somebody? Did I do something inconsiderate and not even realize what I was doing? You know what I mean? You're checking in a healthy way. But a person who immediately dismisses that and then instead tries to convince you what a nice person they are is probably working too hard to convince you that they're a nice person. I'm scared to just block her on Facebook and on my phone. She has low self-esteem and her vibe is like single white female. Okay, yeah, so that is a very common narcissistic woman, often the borderline type, the single white female. Be very cautious with them. Yeah, so you're scared to block her because you're probably scared of the rage, right? Then you follow up. Do I just block someone after I already gave her feedback and she blew it off and also said, I made you feel uncomfortable, not in a way that was real, but that was, I'm sorry you are bothered and I'm mad at you. Yeah, I would just go no contact with that person, like just immediately, because it just stops it. Because any further correspondence with that person is just going to be her justifying and just exhausting you and creating like false accusations. And then, you know, more and more can just get, as soon as you start to realize that, you know, like you see that response and it's like, whoa, you know, that's where you just want to stop responding. Just block the person. You don't owe her an explanation. You don't have to, because any explanation that you give a narcissist, and you probably already realized this, is an open door to them. Like any justification or explanation you give them, like when you're setting a boundary, is what they use to justify and rationalize why they're going to invade your boundary, why they're going to violate your boundary, why they have the right to violate your boundary, or why you should feel guilty and ashamed for even setting that boundary to begin with. That's where it gets dangerous. That's where it gets confusing. So that's why it's best just to go no contact and not give an explanation or justification, because it only opens the door for them to come in and try to convince you that you're wrong, or that your excuse isn't good enough, or your justification isn't good enough. You know what I mean? And then you're still just playing their game. So yeah, when you get that single white female vibe, or maybe it's a single male, vibe, whatever that is, like, run the other way quickly. Cut that off, because that's going to go really bad really quickly. Like, especially like that, that kind of vibe, the single white female, where they're like imitating you, and like they're trying to be like you, and they're trying to get in on your life, and they're going to insert themselves in your life like a wedge between everything that you care about and everyone that you care about. That's how those characters work. I have met those characters. They are very dangerous. They will try to wreck everything in your life. So you don't owe her an excuse. You do need to take care of yourself and take care of your boundaries. I would just cut that off. I think I skipped a few up here. Let me come back here. The stories. Someone asked here, what do they get out of telling the same stories over and over? What do they get? Probably a lot of things. Probably one of the things they get is they're convincing themselves that it's real, right? Because like, if how does that go? Like, if you tell a lie enough, eventually you start to believe it, right? So if they tell the story where they're the hero and the savior, or they're redeemed or something like that, and they tell it over and over again, then they believe it, and they think they're convincing you by telling you over and over again. Just like that other woman, was telling that person how, nice she is, by telling her over and over, she was trying to convince herself, but then she was trying to convince the other person that she's actually nice, and to ignore all the evidence otherwise. And so, yeah, they're getting that kind of supply out of the stories, but also the supply in the form of like attention. Because when they tell the story over and over again, either they're just so delusional, they don't remember that they told you that story like over and over again. And you're thinking like, how do you not remember, that you didn't tell me that? Like, already, like, we've known each other for 3 months and you told me the story 4 times already. Like, how don't you remember? Or maybe somebody you've known all your life, and they just like, for years, they just keep telling the same story, and you're like, Ma, I've heard that story, or like, Dad, I've heard that story. And they're like, oh, maybe they're even like put off that you don't want to like go ahead and listen to the end of the story. Or the best part is when they just keep telling it anyways, like they just can't help themselves. It's part of the histrionics, like I think it's mostly though, like the reality. It's like, creating that reality that they want to believe in, the delusion that they want to believe in, and the delusion that they want other people to subscribe to, and the attention they get in the process. Someone says, referring the new friend, I find this mantra helps. Don't believe anything you hear. Believe half of what you see and everything you feel. I like that. I haven't heard that before, but I like that. And yeah, your feeling, right? That is your barometer. Your feeling is connected to your intuition. Your feeling is telling you what's real for you right now, here in this moment. So if you're feeling dread, maybe something's not good. Maybe there's something in your life that you need to change. Maybe there's a boundary that you need to feel safer. Maybe you're accepting something that you shouldn't be accepting, even though on the surface it appears like it's okay. Deep down, it's actually not. If you're getting that feeling like this person is deceiving you, if you're getting that feeling like this person is telling me what I want to believe, but I don't really feel the love from this person. They're saying they're supportive of this or that in my life, but I actually think they're kind of resentful, and then that's confusing, right? And so the danger is that you would accept what the other person is saying and convincing you, versus that feeling that you feel that something's just not quite right. Got to go with that feeling. That feeling is your inner barometer. The feeling is your internal GPS. It will tell you what is the situation for you, what is real for you, what is your truth, what is healthy for you. So listen to your feeling first and foremost, and look at the actions of what people are doing. Sometimes people will do, actions and try to win your favor that, aren't genuine, but what you'll see is over time that doesn't hold up, right? So at the very beginning, maybe you see a lot of, positive actions with this person, you know, and maybe what they're saying matches what they're doing for the most part. But then over time, the action disappears more and more, and they're doing less and less of that. Over time, the actions will reveal them. But the feeling you'll know from the very beginning, if you listen to it, right? If you don't doubt it, you know, and second guess it based on what someone else is trying to get you to believe. So go with that feeling, listen to your intuition, even when everybody else is telling you otherwise. Listen to that feeling, because how many times have you kicked yourself for not listening to it, right? That was your intuition trying to get your attention. And then later you look back and you're like, oh man, I really should have listened, you know? But the funny thing about intuition is like, there is no proof, right? Like you can't prove a feeling, but it's something real. Like it's alive. It's in your body. It's in some intangible way, but it's very real, right? Like you don't see it written. You don't have like the exact proof of it, but maybe like it connects to your body in some way. And maybe there's a very predictable way that your body tells you, you know, like maybe your stomach gets queasy when something's not right, or like you feel like you have to go take a shit all of a sudden, or like your knees get weak, or like you get these weird tinglies, you know, whatever it is. But notice your body and notice how that intuitive feeling is also being communicated by your body somehow. Like your intuition is trying to connect with you, because maybe the feeling is too intangible for you, and maybe you don't trust yourself enough. So maybe your body starts to resonate with that and try to give you, you know, some more message, some more blatant message. And if you're really perceptual, if you're really connected with your body and tuned in, you just close your eyes and sit with yourself and ask yourself, okay, where do I feel this feeling in my body right now? And then just allow it to come up. Maybe it'll surprise you. Maybe you're like, oh yeah, that's that thing that I always feel, and I felt it last time. Oh, right. Or maybe you're just like, oh, wow, that's what my body is doing to tell me, right? So listen to that feeling. Trust your intuition. Someone else says, our gut feeling is never wrong. Yeah, it only goes wrong when we don't listen to it. You know, when we act against it, that's when it goes wrong. Someone says here, cluster Bs hijack the time-honored tradition of storytelling, making themselves seem like a bona fide member of community. Storytelling is losing its place in providing structure as we experience more and more abuse of the institutions we have depended on. It's the challenge of the time we live in to become truth detectors. That is a really interesting point here that you're making about the storytelling. You know, when you look at like the history of humanity, they talk about how we're storytellers, you know, and all this, and that used to be how we would pass on the lineage. Isn't that funny, right? Like in families, passing on the lineage of abuse, the legacy of abuse, you know, and the storytelling and the bullshit that gets passed on from generation to generation, even if it's the storytelling of, oh, my parents are just the most wonderful, blah, 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 when really they were narcissists, you know, and like that sort of thing. Or, oh, my childhood was just so wonderful, we're always blah, 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 but the person is not telling you about any of the abuse that went on, you know, that sort of situation, that kind of thing. Or where they're just making up these false stories, you know, to redeem their character, or to make themselves look good, or to paint the image of the character. So yeah, truth detectors, right? And it comes back to that feeling, the intuition. When you're listening to that conversation and someone's telling you the story, and you're just getting this really like icky feeling, like something's just not right. That's your feeling telling you something's probably not right there. That's your truth detector telling you maybe you should pay attention in a different way, like not so much to the words, but to something else, you know, or like, why does this person keep telling me this particular story? Why are they trying so hard to convince me of something in that story? So what is the point? You know, is the point of the story to make them look blah, blah, blah? Okay, so maybe that person wants you really to think that they are blah, 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 because you actually think just the opposite, or you want to take some action that's going to nullify the fact that this person believes that they are blah, 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 you know, something like that. They're probably working pretty hard to convince you of something that's not true. So like this person said, the challenge of the time is to become a truth detector. Oh, the person from the toxic friendship, I don't want her in my life. I just don't know what I owe her. She's been through a lot, but that's not my problem. If I just block her, that's one way. If I say, I really don't see a fit here, and then block, is that better? You could, if you feel like you need to say that, you know, but don't get caught again in the justification, right? Because if you say, you know, hey, this really isn't working for me, or I just really don't feel the fit for the friendship, and I wish you all the best, you know, and then you want to go ahead and block her, that's okay too, but just don't wait for the response, because if you wait for the response, then what's going to happen is that person, and you'll see, they're negating everything that, you know, whatever your explanation, your justification was, they're negating that. And they're going to try to make you doubt it and try to make you second guess it. You know, as long as you know that's the game and that's predictably what's going to happen, you know, as long as you're really clear with yourself about the boundary, about, okay, I'm going to send this message and then that's really it. I'm going to tell her it's not a good fit. I wish you all the best. And that's it. Then make that it. And make that boundary really clear with yourself, because if you tempt yourself then to go back and read the answer, like something in that answer could trigger your doubt. And that doubt could send you into downward spiral tailspin, you know? And like you said, yeah, she's been through a lot, and that's not your problem. That's an important thing to remember, because so many of those like single white female types, the borderline types, they will hook you in, you know, based on being the victim, based on having been through a lot. And they will try to manipulate your guilt into how could you abandon them? How could you not offer them friendship when they've been through so much, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But again, that's not your problem, because you didn't hurt that person, you know, so you don't owe her anything. You don't. And I know that's really hard, right? Because it says that that's what you're questioning. Like, you just don't know what you owe her, you know? So if you feel better about setting that final boundary with that text saying, I'm sorry, I just really don't feel a good fit here with this friendship, I wish you all the best, and then cut it off, then that's fine. But just be really clear with yourself that you're making that cut, that you're putting that boundary up, that you're not going to then get back and forth with her, you know, dismantling your justification for why. Okay, so this person is responding to another person. I'm not sure. My gut feeling told me that my narc was my soul's mate. Human magnet syndrome. It felt completely right. My gut feeling is often wrong. That's why I need to study all this and break the cycle. Okay, so I had the same feeling about like one of my, and probably several of them, but in particular this one covert narcissist. I really felt like he was my soulmate. Like, he had me completely convinced of that from the beginning. And at the end of it, being so distraught, thinking, how could I have been so wrong? Like, how could my intuition have been so wrong? I really, really thought that he was my soulmate. And it was so perfect. How could it have been so wrong? And so I was listening to YouTube, and it was like the first research I had done, you know, on narcissism and codependency and the attraction. And it's so funny that you mentioned the human magnet syndrome, because it was a video by Ross Rosenberg. I didn't remember his name at the time, but I remembered hearing like the psychologist talking about how there is no relationship that feels so perfect and so right as that between a codependent and a narcissist, because it is the perfect yin yang attraction. It's the opposites attract thing. And so like your patterns perfectly fit his patterns. So when you no longer have the codependency patterns, it no longer fits. It no longer feels just right, but it felt just right because that person was willing to play that exact opposite role that you were looking for, right? So if you were a codependent caretaker, you wanted someone to take care of. You know, if you didn't have enough boundaries to protect yourself, you attracted someone who had no respect for boundaries. You know, if you were hoping and praying for this soulmate to come in and maybe rescue from your life or from this feeling of loneliness that you felt all your life, then you meet this narcissist who comes in acting the hero and tells you everything that you want to hear and is acting everything that you wanted someone to be. And like, if your thing is like you felt so lonely because you wanted like the physical touch, you know, and the cuddling and the hugging, and this person was giving that to you, and you're like, oh my God, I met my soulmate. But this person was probably just giving you everything that they thought you wanted. You know, they were making themselves into that role of soulmate. Plus they happen to have those opposite tendencies, you know, the narcissistic tendencies being the opposite tendencies of the codependent, and why that feels so right. So it wasn't that your intuition was wrong. And that's what I tried to reconcile with myself afterward, because, you know, I was trying to rebuild the self-trust, and I was like, well, how do I rebuild the self-trust if I know my intuition was so wrong? Like, how could I have made such a bad mistake? How could I have really thought that person was it. But then I recognized it. Why? Because that was the pattern. The pattern was attracting that. It did feel perfect because I was so unconscious of my codependency patterns at the time, right? But the more conscious I became of them, the more aware I became of them, the more I started changing those patterns. And so now when I meet narcissists who have similar tendencies to like the ex, I recognize that immediately, and I'm like, ooh, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good at all because I've upgraded my patterns. I've changed myself. And so now that no longer fits. There's no more longer the hook. Like it's no longer the yin yang thing. You know, they no longer have what I need because I'm feeling that need. I'm feeling that loneliness void that I had felt before. I'm not desperately looking for that in someone else. You know, I'm taking care of myself and my own needs. So I'm also not putting out that vibe, which is then attracting the perfect mate to fill that role. So I think that's why it was so confusing for so many of us, like feeling like the intuition went wrong, but really it didn't. It was just your intuition found you exactly what you thought you were looking for. You thought you were looking for a hero, probably. You thought you were looking for a companion. You thought you were looking for whatever you thought you were looking for, just like I was looking for whatever I thought I was looking for. But really, I was looking for an unhealthy pattern. I just didn't recognize it as that, you know? And then once you change your patterns and they become healthy, that's when you start attracting different people and you start feeling attracted to people with different patterns. Someone says, I agree with those other two people. It felt right with my narc, but there were many red flags in my gut that I ignored. That's the other thing too, right? So like at the beginning, I also ignored some red flags. Like there were some things that felt really good about what he was saying and doing, but then there were other things that didn't feel right. You know, like, really, did he know I was his soulmate after 10 days? Really? Like I wanted to believe in that, but that's probably not a good sign. You know, somebody telling you that they love you within 10 days, 2 weeks, like they don't really know you. They're probably infatuated with you. They probably like have a crush on you. They're enamored, you know, by you. They're really excited and infatuated and feeling the passion and the chemistry. But love is, you know, a bond. It's intimacy. It's trust built over time. 2 weeks is not time. It's not time enough to build that sort of relationship. Someone else chimed in on that and says, we don't listen at the start because we totally believe they're our soulmates. Yeah, especially if that's what we're looking for. Like, you know, if all our life we've been looking and dreaming for that soulmate, right? Then it could open us up to the danger of that manipulation, because you bet that person tuned into that. Even if you didn't literally say those words. I mean, I did, right? So I put it out there. All he had to do was mimic the words I was saying, you know, be a parrot that back to me. And it looked just like what I wanted. You know, he was just listening to me say that. Does he ever use that word in his real life? Probably not, you know, but if that's what we're looking for and that's what we're projecting outward and they tune into that, you know, and they want to come in as the hero and the savior, and that's the confusing part. That's where the self-honesty comes in, right? Okay, talking about earlier about the conversations. Yes, I agree. Every conversation is an endless trap. The more you want them to understand, the less they'll understand and the more they'll blame you. I had a friend like that. You can't heal them. Amen. You can't heal them. You can't convince them. Like as soon as you catch yourself, right? Because always you want to give the person a benefit of the doubt, right? But not keep second guessing and self-doubting yourself for them. So if you enter that conversation and you're like, okay, here's what I see and here's how I perceive things, and the person comes back with something, you know, give them a benefit of the doubt for the second to check in. Like, are you wrong? You know, did you make a misperception? Did you assume something that wasn't true? Or is this person manipulating you? Is this person rationalizing, excuse making, minimizing, guilt tripping, blame shifting, doing all the covert aggressive manipulation tactics? You know, so get really clear about that. And check in, make sure that you didn't make the mistake first, right? But if it seems pretty clear, and what's really clear is that that person is using those manipulation tactics to dismantle, you know, whatever position you have, whatever emotional need you have, whatever feeling you have, whatever perception of reality you have, and they're trying to convince you that you're wrong and they're right, and they're just going on, and you're like starting to feel exhausted and like you're trapped in that. Then you know that's not a good situation. and it's just going to exhaust you to have those conversations. Those are circular conversations. They become word salad, and you don't get anywhere except for utter exhaustion. A person from before says, I was conditioned to negate my gut feelings all growing up. So now I need to figure them out. Yeah, exactly. So, when you're raised in a family with a narcissist, or, worse yet, if both parents are narcissistic, then, as a child from very young, you learn to put aside your needs, your feelings, your thoughts, your perceptions of reality, because either you're totally wrong or there's no place for that. There's no room for that, because all that matters is mom or dad's or both of theirs, and not yours. And so you better just put all that aside and focus entirely on them, right? Because that's the message that the kid gets growing up in that environment. You're not worthy. Your feelings are not worthy. They're meaningless, and so now you got to be there for yourself and honor those feelings. When you get that gut feeling, say, okay, I hear you. I hear you. What are you trying to communicate to me? I hear you. I want to listen to you. What are you trying to tell me? And really open up and encourage that inner dialogue with your feelings, with your intuition, that connection. I hear you. And I'm open to understand more. What do I need to understand? And ask it questions, ask your intuition questions to let it fill in the blank, to let it make it more clear to you, to show your intuition that you're intending and trying to make this connection more clear, so that you can hear and feel your intuition a lot more clearly than in the past. It's always there. The intuition is always there. It's just that when you've been taught all your life to stuff it down, it's just the voice gets really quiet, the feelings get more subtle, or the feelings can get muddled and confusing. But mostly the confusion is in the rationalization part, because the intuition is not a rational thing. It's not. But not everything that's not rational is bad, right? Like, that's our society that tells us, like, rational thought is the only way. Rational thought is the most valuable way, but that's not entirely true, because the other half of the picture, right? Because it's only one half of your brain. The other half is the intuitive half. And that is just as real. It's just as valid. It's just as valuable, right? It's just like our culture, our society doesn't really validate it, doesn't really value it, and that's where you got to show up for your intuition, or you need to value it, you need to validate it. And the more you work on strengthening that connection with your intuition, the more clear you're going to hear it, and the easier it's going to be for you to take action and listen to it, versus the automatic self-doubt rationalization that will kick in, when you're still in that point of like being unsure of your intuition. It's like the rationalization and the self-doubt kicks in, and you're like, well, okay, maybe that can't be true because of this or that. And well, you really have no proof because of this or that. And then you're just talking yourself out of it, right? So the more you strengthen that connection, the more you say, okay, I hear you. I want to hear more. Tell me more, or something like, that's interesting, intuition, tell me more, and maybe your intuition speaks more to you in vision, like visualization. Maybe you see something like a vision, or maybe you're just looking around reality and certain things pop out, and it's like those things are communicating something to you. Or maybe for you, it's more auditory. And so maybe you hear it through your inner voice, or you hear a phrase or a word, or some song comes to you, or you know what I mean? And it comes in this sort of way. Or maybe for you, you're more kinesthetic, and it's just like this feeling you get in your body or your soul or somewhere that you can't really explain, but you just know is true, right? That sort of clairsentience, like, then that's how your intuition is talking to you. So, the more clear you are on the way your intuition talks to you, the more you'll be aware to pay attention for those signs too, and then to validate them when they come up, and to encourage your intuition to keep talking. It's like talking to a little child at first. You don't want to scare it away, you don't want to like tell it it's all wrong, or punish it. But be like, okay, that's interesting. Tell me more. And just let it come with more and more. Someone says here, so I'm on Meetup. If we're in the same Meetup, I might see her again. Okay, this is that friend. If I just block her, I will be living in fear of her. Somehow I need to stand up inside myself to people like this. Okay, so maybe you want to go ahead and send her that message then, saying, I'm sorry, I just don't really feel a good fit for a friendship, and I wish you all the best, or however you want to say that, but wishing her something positive, and then when you go to Meetup, you just don't have to get in the conversation. You don't have to talk to her. Maybe you could see her across the room and just say, smile and carry on, but just be busy and be purposeful and focus on other things. If this person is just like targeting you and seeking you out and unrelentless, it might get to the point where you won't be able to go to that meetup anymore unless you want to deal with that, and it could get to the point where you try to stand up to this person, but because of how toxic this person is and how convincing they are, that they've now convinced, other people in that group that, somehow you're a problem, and they start a smear campaign, and then it gets really uncomfortable. And then what if nobody believes you because there's this bully, right? So any of those things are possible. It could be that she just backs down, but chances are no. Chances are people like that just don't back down suddenly. If she has the target on you, she has the target on you, and you standing up might feel really good for you. And maybe that's one thing you need to do before setting that boundary. But if you find that you try to go to this meetup and you just have to keep standing up and it's not working, and she's attacking you worse and trying, worse toxic things, and you're just exhausted, then it's not working, and then you need to cut off from that environment, because you can't remove that person from that environment. You can't control that. The only thing you control is you and where you go, and finding a different group, to hang out with. And it is unfortunate when it's your life and you found this group and you like this group and you want to participate in this group. It's really unfortunate when you have to change your life because there's this really toxic person who's just making your life difficult there. But then again, it comes back down to that question, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Do you want to sit there and try to convince everybody at that meetup that you're right and that person's wrong and that person should just back down and leave you alone? Or do you just want to just be happy and walk away from all that? So really listen to your intuition and check things out, and, give it everything you can on the meetup. But if you discover that it's just not going to work out because that person just won't change, they won't take the hint, they won't move on to someone else, they won't stop bothering you, and they're making it more complicated for you, then you're going to have to make that cut for your own well-being. Someone else says, I'm also part of different support groups online, and there is a person who I got really close to because I saw her like my sister. They're about the same age, and the caretaker in me was spending additional time chatting with her since she seemed to be struggling. One day she was so distressed over her therapist leaving town without giving any notice. After 30 minutes of me trying to console her, I asked for her therapist's name and said that I wanted to Google her. This person then 2 seconds later said, "Oh, I found her." Okay? She proceeded to say, "It's okay, and I'm over her now." Wait, I just spent all this time consoling you, and now you're over it? I since then unfriended her and blocked her. The thing is that she's pretty good with the admins of the group and others. What do you think? I haven't addressed this to anybody because I don't want to give it weight. Is it possible for the admins who are professionals to be blinded by this person? Yeah, it's definitely possible. It's possible that the admins are blind, just like so many therapists can get conned by a narcissist or other cluster B and not realize what they're into. Or the other situation, could be that the admins are narcissists, or somewhere on that spectrum, and they could be getting off on that somehow, so one or the other is possibly happening. Neither way is going to be helpful or safe for you. It's really good that you put out that little truth barometer to check in, like, oh, hey, let me Google this person. And then, oh, isn't that funny? Suddenly this person is no longer upset. It's just like when you're in a relationship with a person like that, and they're so upset and so upset and so upset. And then finally you give in to do what they want. And now it's like the tears stop. It's like just magic, oh, they're just fine now. It's like, wait a second, you were just so distraught. How did we go? And then you realize like those tears aren't real. That's a manipulation tactic. That's, the person using victimhood as a form of manipulation to hook you in. And just like we were talking about earlier in that drama triangle, that's the victim who's always like, I have this problem and I want you to pretend like you're going to try to solve it and keep giving me all this attention, but I'm not going to let you solve my problem because I'm not going to allow my problem to be solvable. And maybe I just made up the problem to begin with, to have a problem to hook you in, right? Which sounds like is the situation here. So yeah, good job cutting off from that person, recognizing that, blocking her. And, if the admins don't realize it and they want to give her time and attention to that, that's their problem. But if it becomes your problem and it becomes unsafe and toxic for you in that situation, then, you know, your gut's going to tell you that, and you might have to set a new boundary. You know, you might have to set the boundary of, you know, okay, first, do you want to speak your truth? Is it safe to speak your truth? And can you talk to them in privately? Or are they just not safe, you know, and healthy people to talk to? And is it just better to walk away and find another group? You know, so really check in with your intuition, check in with your gut, see how you're feeling about things, and see where they're at, and see what your gut feeling is about them. Like, do they recognize the problem? Are they just blind to it? Are they just completely oblivious, in denial? Or are they getting something out of that? Is something serving them? You know, so, you know, either if they just don't see it, and there's a way that you can talk to them about it, and then they can see it and be like, oh, wow, yeah, I didn't realize, and now I see, that's a different situation. But if they don't get it, and then that makes it more complicated for you, and then what if, you know, they target you and it's like all of them against you, and now you're the problem, and it's just your reality is the only reality that isn't like everybody else's, you know what I mean? And then it becomes like a gang against you, mobbing sort of situation. So be very cautious with that, you know, and just keep checking with your intuition. If you don't feel good, it's not good for you. If you don't feel good, nothing's being resolved there, and you can't be safe within your boundaries in that group, then you probably need to find another group. Okay, so yeah, what do you think I should do? I think I answered that. The admins are coaches and therapists themselves. It doesn't mean any human is perfect, right? Because like any coach or therapist could get swindled too. They could be deceived by someone and not realize, like, especially if they don't have direct experience with cluster B and even know what the red flags are to look out for. But even if they do know, they could get caught in that, because especially, you know, like the victim type, they're really confusing, because oftentimes they do appear to be the victim, and they can really hook you in, you know, trying to help them and feeling guilty about not helping them and feeling like it's your responsibility to help them. So that's why the victim thing can get really confusing, you know, when the narcissist or borderline is using the victimhood as a way of getting supply, as a way of manipulating people. So I'll be really cautious. You know, if you want to try to open the dialogue with the admins, feel it out and see how things are going, you know, without putting it all out there right away, you know, because that could leave you too open. But test a little, test the waters, see how, you know, try to talk to them in private, test the waters a little, see how that's working. If you're just not getting a good feeling, like they don't want to hear it or they're not going to hear it, then just stop trying to do that and walk away, you know, because you can't control anybody else. You can't control, even when it's the truth and you like so desperately want someone to see the truth. If they don't want to see it, you can't force them to accept it. Venus is snoring. Someone says, I'm inclined to send this. I've thought about things and I don't have the energy to put in what's needed to develop a friendship with you. So I am withdrawing contact. I wish you the best. Okay. So the only thing, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, because a narcissist might hear that and say, you don't have the energy to put in what's needed to develop a friendship with me. Like, what's wrong with me that, you know, you don't have the energy or you need the energy? You know what I mean? So I would possibly not leave that opening too. I would just maybe say something like, just put it all on you. Like, I don't feel it's working for me, or I'm just not feeling it, or something like that, where it's just all and it's just you taking the responsibility of that. And then at the end, I wish you well. You know, it's like, I've thought about things and I just, you know, I'm just at a place in my life where I'm recognizing this doesn't feel good. It's not working for me, whatever you want to say. And I wish you well. And then just leave it like that. So like you're accepting the responsibility of why you're making the thing, instead of saying like what's needed for your friendship. Do you know what I mean? Like that, the person could take that because they're so hypersensitive. They're looking for any perceived criticism to overblow it. You know what I mean? The response in return. So she could take that as a criticism, as a perceived criticism, like what's needed for that friendship. Do you know what I mean? So just make it more about you, where there's nothing else for her to come in. And yeah, you know, go ahead and send that message then when you feel good about that, and just don't wait for the response. And that's the tempting thing. Like, be super clear with your boundary before you hit the send button. You know, so clear with your boundary that you're not going to get back in that conversation in the justifying and rationalizing why, you know, because they're going to want to dismantle that. Someone else said to the person with the support group, be careful around those groups. A lot of the admins can be very cruel. They make me wonder sometimes who the victims are. Wow. Yeah, I haven't had that experience. I tend not to get involved in those groups. I really don't know what goes on with them. But that makes sense. You know, if a narcissist or someone on the cluster B is in that position of power, an admin in the group, you know, if they see that as a way to take advantage and manipulate and extort, you know, and hurt people in the group, then they could possibly become very cruel to anyone who is challenging that, you know, or challenging their perception or challenging their leadership or anything of that nature. So I would just proceed with caution, you know, gently open things without putting it all out there. Keep the boundaries, don't overshare, and test the waters. And if you don't get a good feeling, listen to the feeling. Someone writes a private question about another narc. I know my ex is a narc, but I keep having these recurrent nightmares where he has a new girlfriend. I don't know if he has one, and we talk and have some kind of contact. And then I think, how could I talk to him again? I'm screwed again after all the progress I made and all the things I learned. So I have these opposite feelings. Clearly missing him despite I don't want him back, and I know he's a sociopath on one side, and being afraid that if he shows up or texts, I'll fail miserably again and talk to him. But I know I wouldn't answer if he tried to reach me. I'm so sick of these nightmares because then I wake up upset and I think about him more that day due to my nightmare, and I have no control over my dreams. I'm so sick of it. You think there is something I can do or I should address in order to shut up my subconscious and end these nightmares and also stop thinking about him? Okay, so the nightmare is recurring nightmares where he has a new girlfriend and we talk and I have some kind of contact, and then you regret, how could I talk to him again? I'm screwed. Okay. So what does the dream mean? Okay, so if the dream is recurring, it's trying to tell you something, right? So, you know, in this dream, if you feel, okay, so if you feel like he has a new girlfriend, maybe, just maybe, there is part of your subconscious that still feels sad about him moving on with someone else. Maybe that's the fear of seeing him with a new girlfriend. You know, there's still some residual feeling that you still have for him, or still maybe hurts to think of him with someone else, right? So maybe if that's the case, you want to get more honest with yourself about how, in waking life, consciously, how relieved you are that that's not you, that you're out. And like, maybe even imagine him with a new girlfriend, and imagine her, and imagine like a really attractive woman, and you looking at this woman and thinking, I'm so glad I'm not you. I'm so glad I'm not you. Thank God I'm not you. I'm so glad I'm not you. And just like go through this like visualization experience where maybe you don't really believe it at first, but then you start to believe it. And maybe you need to remind yourself of all the reasons why you're so glad you're not the new girlfriend. Like, oh man, I'm so glad I don't have to go through that again, you know? And like really remind yourself of like the bad stuff and why you don't want to be the new girlfriend, so that you can get out those feelings that are probably still tricking you. They're probably still deep down in there, that are still kind of wishing, you know, or feeling something, you know, about that. And so that way you're super clear. You don't want to be the next girlfriend, and you're really glad he's not in your life anymore. Now, the part where you beat yourself up, you know, like, how could I talk to him again? So maybe there's part of you that still doesn't trust you. So maybe that's the self-trust issue. So, you know, maybe you want to also work this out in waking life and conscious life through visualization. So like, imagine seeing him, or imagine him texting you, or imagine him emailing you, or however you would imagine him reaching out to you and imagining you rejecting that, like not getting the message or not answering or blocking him on the phone or seeing him in the street and just walking the other way, or like somehow that you make that message so clear to your subconscious that you are powerful, you are in control of your decisions, because the no contact is the power over that person, right? The only power you have over that person is to not respond, to not reach out and to not respond to them. That's what the no contact is. So if you feel powerful in the no contact, it's because you're managing that no contact. If you're afraid of that, or you're afraid that you're going to slip and you're going to get back into it, maybe consciously you're not afraid of that because like you really don't believe you want to go back there, but subconsciously there's still a program that's afraid that you're going to go back. So what I would do in the conscious mind is that visualization where you just practice like 100 different scenarios of how you would reject him, or how you would not go back, or how you would not answer that text, or how you would not look at him in person, or, you know, not talk to him if he even was trying to get your attention, and what you would do. And so this just sends the message of empowerment to your subconscious, because remember, your subconscious doesn't know the difference between what you're imagining is happening and what's really happening. So if you're imagining that you're saying no, you're saying no, you're saying no, your subconscious starts to believe, oh, this is really easy to say no to him. Oh, I got this. You know, and so maybe then the dreams stop coming because you've really convinced your subconscious that you got this, that you're not going back. You're not going to respond to him no matter what he shows up with. And thank God you're not the new girlfriend, because you don't want to be the new girlfriend. And so hopefully that will start to filter out of your dream space. Okay, let's see here. Let me catch up here. So we have like 5 more minutes. There's a bunch of questions in here. Let me address what I can, and then I'm going to copy the rest for later. Someone says here, the capacity to be a caretaker versus the lack of awareness to become an enabler is often tested by the predatory narc on the hunt, whether in a new relationship or a hoovering attempt. Failing to find narcissistic supply can launch a vindictive rage as though some non-existent contract was broken. Marriage is a favorite cover. The nice thing about no contact is that more punishment for failing them will never have to happen. Right. Yeah, that's really interesting what we talked about here, the non-existent contracts. You know, like you owe them. That's their entitlement, right? Like if you don't respond or give them what they want to whatever test that is, then they can go into that rage, you know, because of the entitlement. You didn't give them what they wanted. They deserve it, right? Okay, people are talking about the groups. Someone suggested maybe sending a private message to the founder of the group. Yeah, test the waters. Yeah, someone else says they don't share in groups anymore or in other streams. You know, you just always want to be cautious, you know, in support groups, because could be that there's a lot of other people just like you there who have been through a horrible or many horrible experiences, and they just want, you know, other fellow survivors to talk to get support, to feel better, to feel validated, to not feel alone. But if you think about it, you know, that's also the perfect place for a predator to go find a victim, because where else is there a high density concentration of people who have already been victims of that kind of abuse? So if they're smart, they set themselves up to go there. It's just like the kind of predator narcs that show up in religious and spiritual communities. Same deal. They're looking, you know, so many people end up moving towards religion and spirituality because something major devastating happens in their life that opens them up, and they start looking for a higher power, or they start looking for teachings that make sense of things, or things to help them better themselves and change their lives, or to make sense of like a devastating experience they have. So they're wide open, you know, to these kinds of predators. So never assume that the environment is totally safe, right? But again, that's just an analogy for life. Like when you walk out the door, suit up, put on your boundaries, and know that anything is possible. Anything can come at you during a day, and be ready. Like, you know, have the boundary and be yourself, and know that like the boundary protects who you are, and that there will be, and there are certain people that you can share your full self with, your authentic full self, and have a lot of sharing, you know, about real things and being real with people. But then most of the people in the world, you know, you need to have some more strict boundaries with, and not let them in so deep and not reveal who you are so much with them, because that could set you up to be a victim. It could put you at risk. So approach with caution. And it's a good exercise in boundaries. It's a good exercise in recognizing red flags and setting your boundaries. Because if you don't feel good, there's probably a boundary that's compromised. And it might even be a boundary that you aren't aware that you need to set, some kind of limit that you haven't been protecting. And then you can look at that person like, a teacher, like, thanks for, teaching me that I need to have a boundary there. It doesn't mean I need to keep you as a friend or in my life at all, but thanks for reminding me that I want to go ahead and put that boundary there to keep myself safe and healthy and sane in life. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and copy these last several comments just in case there's something here to bring in later tonight. Again, the time just flew by. Can't believe it. Thank you all so much for sharing your questions and your experiences and for showing up today and supporting each other. And I'm sending you all a big hug, and I'll be back here in 4 hours. See you soon.